It started with a dinner plate. One simple, everyday dinner plate that I accidentally dropped while washing the dishes after our weekly Sunday roast. The sound of porcelain shattering against our kitchen tile floor seemed to echo throughout our Boston brownstone. I froze, dish towel still in hand, waiting for the inevitable. "For God's sake, Emily," Dad's voice boomed from the living room. "Can't you do anything right?" I was 32 years old, with a master's degree in education, and my own classroom of fifth graders who adored me. Yet in this house, I was still the clumsy little girl who couldn't be trusted with the good china. "Sorry," I called out, kneeling to pick up the pieces. It slipped. Mom appeared in the doorway, her lips pressed into that familiar thin line. "That was part of the set your grandmother gave us for our wedding." Her voice was quiet, which was always worse than yelling. 37 years we've had those plates, and now we're down to 5. I swallowed the urge to point out that things break, that it was just a plate, that maybe if they'd let me replace their ancient dish rack with something more stable, accidents like this wouldn't happen. Instead, I apologized again and continued cleaning up the mess. This was the dance we'd perfected over decades, me making mistakes, them pointing them out, me apologizing for existing. And the most ridiculous part? I kept coming back Sunday after Sunday for more of the same. My therapist, Sarah, called it a repetition compulsion, this need to return to the scene of the emotional crime, hoping for a different outcome. The thing is, I loved my parents. Dad, with his crossword puzzles and endless stories about his time as a history professor at Boston College. Mom, with her garden club achievements and the way she still remembered every single one of my friends from elementary school. They weren't monsters. They were just disappointed. In me, specifically. My older brother Jack was the golden child. Harvard Law, perfect wife, 2 perfect children, house in Cambridge. I was the perpetual underachiever in their eyes, despite my passion for teaching and the difference I made in my students' lives. My apartment in Somerville might as well have been on another planet compared to Jack's renovated Victorian. That Sunday, as we sat around the dining table, now with mismatched plates, Mom brought up the school fundraiser she'd read about in the local paper. "Emily, isn't that at your school? The article mentioned they're still short on parent volunteers." "We've got it covered," I said, cutting my roast beef into smaller pieces than necessary. "Parents have been really supportive this year." Dad harumphed. "Not what the paper says. Sounds like poor organization to me." "The newspaper doesn't exactly have the inside scoop on our planning committee, Dad." "Well, I'm just saying, when Jack organized the firm's charity auction last year, they exceeded their goal by 30%. And there it was, the comparison I'd been waiting for, right on schedule. "That's great," I said, forcing a smile. "Jack's always been good at that kind of thing." Mom reached over to pat my hand. "You've got other qualities, dear." The conversation moved on, but something inside me didn't. That little pat on the hand, the dismissive tone, the vague reference to other qualities. It was all so familiar, so expected, and suddenly so unbearable. Later, as Dad dozed in, front of the Patriots game, and Mom sorted through her recipes for next week, I stood in their kitchen once again, drying the remaining dishes. I stared at the 5 surviving plates stacked neatly in the cabinet, and something shifted inside me. I'd been planning to tell them my news tonight, that I'd been selected as Massachusetts Teacher of the Year finalist, that there would be a ceremony next month, that after years of pouring my heart into my classroom, someone had noticed. But the words had stuck in my throat all evening, weighted down by the certainty that it wouldn't be enough. Not Harvard Law enough. Not Jack enough. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Aisha. "Did you tell them?" I typed back, "Not yet. Right moment never came." Her response was immediate. "There is no right moment with them, Em. Just say it." Aisha had been witness to this dynamic my entire adult life. She'd seen me rehearse conversations with my parents, plan announcements of my achievements, only to return to her apartment later with those announcements unspoken, my accomplishments, still tucked away like secrets. "Next week," I texted back. "Promise." I put my phone away and glanced at the clock. It was only 8:30, but I suddenly couldn't bear another minute in that house. "I think I'm going to head out," I announced, grabbing my coat from the hall closet. "I have some lesson plans to finish up for tomorrow." Mom looked up, surprised. "But we haven't had dessert. I made your favorite apple crumble." "Rain check?" I said, already halfway to the door. "I'll call you tomorrow." Dad grunted from his recliner, eyes still on the game. "Drive safe. Don't forget to check your tire pressure. That little light on your dashboard has probably been on for months." "It hasn't. But thanks," I replied, suddenly exhausted by the assumption that I couldn't even maintain my own car properly. As I drove back to my apartment, the weight that had been pressing on my chest all evening began to lift slightly. The farther I got from my parents' house, the more I could breathe. By the time I pulled into my parking space, a decision had crystallized. I was done breaking myself against their expectations, done apologizing for the person I had become instead of the person they'd wanted me to be, done showing up every Sunday to be reminded of all the ways I didn't measure up. Next week, there would be no Sunday dinner for me, nor the week after that. It was time to break the pattern, even if it meant breaking much more than just a plate. 3 weeks passed without Sunday dinner. The first Sunday, my phone lit up with 5 missed calls, 3 from Mom, 2 from Dad. I let them go to voicemail, each message increasingly concerned. "Emily, we expected you an hour ago. The pot roast is getting cold. Your mother's worried. Call us back." "Emily Ann Pearson, this isn't like you. We're starting to think something's happened." I finally texted back. "I'm fine. Just need some space. Talk soon." That bought me a day of silence before the texts started rolling in. Dad, predictably, was all business. "Your mother made plans for Sunday. Need to know if you're coming." Mom, tried guilt. "Dad bought those cranberry scones you like from the bakery. They'll go stale." I held firm, responding with polite but brief messages that gave nothing away. I wasn't ready to explain, wasn't sure I could articulate what had changed inside me that night with the broken plate. How do you tell your parents that you're stepping back from them because you can finally see how much smaller you become in their presence? By the 3rd Sunday, the calls had tapered off. I spent the afternoon grading papers in the coffee shop around the corner from my apartment, a place called Groundwork, with exposed brick walls and baristas who knew my order by heart. Kevin, the owner, slid a fresh oat milk latte onto my table without me asking. "You're becoming a regular Sunday fixture around here," he noted, his Boston accent making here sound like he-ah. Not that I'm complaining about the business. Looked up from a particularly creative book report on Bridge to Terabithia and smiled. My schedule opened up recently. "Well, your timing's perfect. Sunday afternoons were always dead before. Now I've got at least one reliable customer." As he walked away, I realized I felt lighter than I had in years. No dreading the drive to my parents' house. No steeling myself for subtle criticisms. No comparing myself to Jack's latest achievement. Just coffee, work I loved, and blessed quiet. My phone buzzed. "Jack?" I hesitated before answering. "Hey, stranger," he said when I picked up. "I hear you've gone AWOL." "Not AWOL, just taking some time for myself." "Mom's beside herself. Says you're not returning her calls." "I've responded to every message, Jack. Just not in the way she wants." He was quiet for a moment. "Look, I'm not getting in the middle of whatever this is, but family dinner is kind of sacred, you know? Dad's actually asking if you're mad at him, which is unprecedented. The fact that my father had noticed my absence enough to wonder about it was indeed surprising. Dad wasn't big on emotional awareness, especially when it came to me. "I'm not mad," I said carefully. "I'm just setting some boundaries." Jack laughed, not unkindly. "Boundaries? With Mom and Dad? Good luck with that. Listen, whatever's going on, just come to dinner next week and smooth things over. I'll be there with Diane and the kids. Safety in numbers, right?" The old me would have caved immediately. The promise of my brother as a buffer would have been enough to pull me back into orbit around my parents. But something had shifted. "I can't next Sunday. I have plans." What plans could be more important than family, Em? It was the perfect opening, the moment to tell him about the Teacher of the Year ceremony. But old habits die hard, and the words stuck in my throat. What if he dismissed it, the way our parents surely would? "Just plans, Jack. I've got to go. Give the kids a hug from me." After hanging up, I stared at my phone, feeling both powerful and guilty. Standing up to Jack had never been part of the plan. He wasn't the problem. Or at least, he was a different problem. My golden boy brother had never intentionally made me feel less than. He'd simply excelled in the ways our parents valued most, while I'd chosen a different path. That night, I unblocked Instagram on my phone. I'd restricted it weeks ago after one too many perfect family photos from Jack's account had sent me into a spiral of comparison. I scrolled through recent posts, stopping at one from my colleague Martina, a photo of me, surrounded by my fifth graders, all of us holding up the papier-mâché solar system we'd spent weeks creating. The caption read, "Our very own Ms. Pearson, Massachusetts Teacher of the Year finalist, showing us all how it's done. Proud colleague, your teacher goals." 26 comments of congratulations followed, including ones from parents, other teachers, even our principal. Not one from my family, because I hadn't told them, hadn't given them the chance to diminish this achievement. On a whim, I shared the post to my own account, something I rarely did with work-related content. Within minutes, my phone started buzzing with notifications. "Aisha, finally! Now they have to acknowledge how amazing you are." My college roommate, "Always knew you'd change the world one classroom at a time." My neighbor, "The kids on our floor talk about you like you're a rock star. Well deserved." The validation felt good, but what I was really waiting for didn't come. No comment or call from Mom or Dad. No text from Jack. Either they hadn't seen it, or they had and didn't know what to say. Both possibilities stung in different ways. Around midnight, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone finally buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Ms. Pearson, it's Zach's dad, Tom. Just saw the news about your award nomination. Zach has been struggling with school for years until he got into your class. This year he's bringing home books to read for fun. Whatever they're measuring to give out that award, they got it right. Just wanted you to know." I sat on the edge of my bed, reading the message 3 times. This parent, who I'd only met twice at conferences, had taken the time to find my number and reach out. Meanwhile, my own family remained silent. The next morning, I woke up to an email from my mother with the subject line, "Did you get nominated for something?" The body contained only one line. Jack saw something on Instagram. No congratulations, no pride, just a question, as if she was fact-checking a rumor. I closed the email without responding and opened my classroom door to welcome my students. Today we were starting a unit on ecosystems, and I'd spent the weekend creating an interactive diorama that transformed one corner of the classroom into a miniature wetland. As the kids filed in, their faces lighting up at the sight, I felt certainty settle over me like a comfortable sweater. This moment, these children, this work, was enough. More than enough. If my family couldn't see that, it was their loss, not mine. The distance I'd created wasn't just physical miles between my apartment and my parents' house. It was space for me to remember who I was outside of their disappointed gaze. And I was beginning to think that person was someone worth knowing. The Massachusetts Teacher of the Year ceremony was held at the State House in Boston, a building I'd visited countless times on school field trips, but never entered as an honored guest. The event was scheduled for 7 p.m. on a Friday, which gave me just enough time to go home after school, change into the navy blue dress Aisha had helped me pick out, and navigate the evening traffic into the city. I'd finally responded to my mother's email 3 days after receiving it, with a brief message containing only the ceremony details and a non-committal. "You're welcome to attend if you'd like." I hadn't heard back, which I'd taken as a no. As I walked up the grand staircase of the State House, smoothing down my dress and checking for what felt like the 100th time that I had my speech note cards in my clutch, I spotted Martina and her husband near the entrance. "There she is!" Martina called out, waving enthusiastically. "Our star!" I laughed, the sound slightly strangled by nerves. One of 5 finalists isn't exactly a star. In this crowd? Absolutely. My money's on you taking the whole thing. Inside, the hall was already filling with educators, administrators, state officials, and family members of the finalists. Aisha texted that she was parking and would be there in 5, and I felt a wave of gratitude that I wouldn't be alone. 3 of my colleagues had also promised to attend, and Principal Washington was scheduled to introduce me if, by some miracle, I won. I was searching for my name card at the finalists table when a familiar voice behind me said, "Should have known you'd pick the place with the most stairs in Boston. Your mother's already complaining about her knees." I whirled around to find my father standing there in a suit I hadn't seen before, my mother beside him peering around the room with unconcealed curiosity, and Jack, Diane, and their kids clustered behind them like a perfect family photo come to life. "You came," I said, the words coming out more accusatory than I'd intended. "Of course we came," Dad replied gruffly. "You think we'd miss our daughter being honored for her teaching stuff?" Mom stepped forward, adjusting her pearl necklace. "We had to scramble to find a sitter for Gatsby, and your father had to reschedule his golf game, but we made it work." The fact that their elderly cat and Dad's weekly golf round were presented as major sacrifices wasn't lost on me, but for once, I let it slide. They were here. Whatever their motivations or reluctance, they had shown up. "Thank you," I said, meaning it despite everything. "There's a family section over there." I pointed to a group of round tables adjacent to where the finalists were seated. 8-year-old Sophie tugged at my hand. "Aunt Emily, Mom said you might win a trophy. Is it big? Can I hold it?" I knelt, down to her level, grateful for the easy affection children offer. "It's not really a trophy, more like a plaque. But if I win, you'll be the first one to hold it, promise." As they moved toward their assigned table, Jack hung back. "Hey," he said, jamming his hands in his pockets. I should have called when I saw that Instagram post. That was a pretty big deal, huh?" "It's fine," I said automatically. "No, it's not. I got caught up in my own stuff and didn't." "Really, Jack, it's okay." He shook his head. "Stop doing that. Stop letting all of us off the hook so easily." The bluntness of his statement caught me off guard. Jack and I had always had an unspoken agreement. He accepted the parental favoritism without acknowledging it, and I pretended not to resent it. This deviation from the script felt dangerous, like stepping onto thin ice. "What do you want me to say?" I asked quietly. "That it hurt when none of you acknowledged it? That I've spent my entire adult life trying to get them to see me the way they see you?" He winced. "I know, Em. I've always known. I just didn't know what to do about it." Before I could respond, Aisha arrived in a flurry of movement and bright colors, hugging me tightly before assessing my family with a critical eye. "So they showed up," she said, not bothering to lower her voice. "Interesting." "Be nice," I whispered. "I'm always nice. I'm the nicest." "Ask anyone," she said, but she softened her expression as she greeted my parents with the perfect blend of respect and cool detachment that only Aisha could manage. The ceremony began with speeches from the Commissioner of Education and various dignitaries. I tried to focus, but my attention kept drifting to my family's table. Dad seemed to be genuinely listening, nodding occasionally at points that resonated. Mom kept glancing around, likely comparing her outfit to those of other attendees. Jack was on his phone under the table, some work emergency, no doubt, while Diane corralled the kids. It was so perfectly them that I almost laughed. Even here, even now, nothing had fundamentally changed. I had been nominated for a prestigious award, yet their behaviors, priorities, and essential natures remained exactly the same. The revelation was oddly freeing. I had spent so long trying to change them, to make them see me differently, when the only person I could actually change was myself. When it came time to announce the finalists, I smoothed my dress, took a deep breath, and walked to the stage when my name was called. Principal Washington's introduction was glowing, highlighting my innovative teaching methods and the remarkable progress my students had made. I scanned the audience as he spoke, finding Aisha's encouraging smile, my colleagues' enthusiastic thumbs up, and finally, my family. Dad's expression was unreadable. Mom was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Crying? That was new. Jack had put his phone away and was watching intently, while Sophie and her brother held up a hastily made sign with "Go Aunt Emily" written in crayon. By the time I stepped to the microphone to give my prepared remarks, something had shifted inside me. I tucked my note cards back into my pocket and spoke from the heart instead. "Teaching isn't just what I do," I began. "It's who I am. In my classroom, every child matters. Every voice is heard. Every achievement, no matter how small, is celebrated." I paused, finding my father's eyes in the crowd. I learned the importance of that from watching what happens when we don't feel seen or valued for who we truly are. For the next 3 minutes, I spoke about education as an act of love, about the sacred trust placed in teachers, about the magic that happens when a child realizes they are capable of more than they ever thought possible. When I finished, the applause was warm and genuine. I didn't win the top award that night. It went to a high school physics teacher who had developed an extraordinary program for girls in STEM. As we congratulated each other afterward, I felt nothing but admiration for her and pride in myself for having made it this far. As the ceremony wound down, I found myself surrounded by well-wishers, colleagues, other finalists, even some of my former students who had come with their parents. Through the crowd, I spotted my family waiting patiently to one side, Sophie looking sleepy against Jack's shoulder. When I finally made my way to them, Dad cleared his throat awkwardly. "Your speech. It was good. Very good." From Dad, this was equivalent to a standing ovation. "We saved you some cake," Mom added, holding out a napkin-wrapped piece. "The frosting is that Italian buttercream you like." It was such a mom thing to do, express love through food rather than words, that I felt a lump form in my throat. "Thanks for coming," I said, including all of them in my gaze. "It means a lot." "We're proud of you, Emily," Jack said, and Diane nodded beside him. "I know we don't always show it right, but we are." The words I'd waited decades to hear should have felt more triumphant. Instead, they felt nice. Just nice. Not life-changing, not validating in the way I'd always imagined. because somewhere during these weeks of distance, I'd stopped needing their approval quite so desperately. As we walked out of the State House, together, Mom linked her arm through mine, something she hadn't done since I was a teenager. "Next Sunday," she said tentatively. "I thought maybe we could try that new brunch place near your apartment, instead of dinner at our house." It was a small olive branch, but a significant one. Mom was suggesting we meet on my turf, break the pattern of me always being the one to travel to them. "I'd like that," I said simply. The night air was cool as we stood on the steps, saying our goodbyes. Dad awkwardly patted my shoulder, Jack gave me a real hug, and Sophie insisted on a high five, because that's what Ms. Pearson does with her students. As they headed to their respective cars, Aisha appeared at my side. "So," she said, watching them go, "progress?" I considered the question carefully. Not exactly. They're still them. I'm still me. But maybe that's okay. "And the Sunday dinner? Strike?" "Evolving into Sunday brunch, on my terms." She nodded approvingly. "Baby steps." We walked to our cars together, the State House lit up behind us like a postcard of Boston. I wasn't naive enough to think that one ceremony had fixed the decades of complicated dynamics between me and my family. The broken patterns would try to reassert themselves. The old roles would beckon. But something fundamental had shifted. I had created distance, and in that space, I had found my voice. I had remembered who I was outside of their expectations. That knowledge couldn't be taken away, even if we slipped back into old habits sometimes. As I drove home along the familiar streets of Boston, I felt strangely at peace. The Emily who had dropped that plate 3 weeks ago had been so brittle, so afraid of disappointing people who were determined to be disappointed. The Emily driving home tonight was different. Not perfect, not completely healed, but more solid somehow. More real. The broken plate had been a beginning, not an ending. And whatever came next, Sunday brunches, family dynamics, continuing tensions, I would face it as this new version of myself. A woman who finally understood that she had always been enough. Sunday brunch became our new tradition. Sometimes at the bistro near my apartment, sometimes at a cafe halfway between our homes, but never at my parents' house. Mom initially suggested hosting at their place, since they had more space, but I held firm. The neutral territory was important, even if I couldn't fully articulate why. The first few brunches were awkward affairs filled with safe topics. The weather, Dad's golf scores, Mom's garden club drama. We circled each other like cautious animals, testing the boundaries of this new arrangement. Jack and his family joined occasionally, which helped buffer the stilted conversations. Sophie's chatter about school filled the silences, and her excitement about Ms. Pearson's classroom gave me an easy opening to talk about my work without feeling like I was bragging. "So the kids actually make their own books?" Dad asked one Sunday in late April, after Sophie had described my class publishing project. He seemed genuinely curious, which was new. "They do. They write the stories, edit them, illustrate them, and we bind them together. They're remarkably good storytellers." "Huh." He nodded thoughtfully. "When I was teaching, I never let undergrads get that creative. Thought it would be chaos." It was the first time he'd ever drawn a parallel between his university career and my elementary teaching. A small acknowledgement, but it landed like a revelation. As spring warmed into summer, these moments happened more frequently, tiny bridges being built over the chasm between us. Mom asked about my students by name, remembering details about them from week to week. Dad once brought an article about innovative teaching methods he'd clipped from the Globe, but old patterns still surfaced. When I mentioned applying for a curriculum development grant, Mom immediately asked if I'd run the numbers past Jack since he was so good with that sort of thing. When I described a difficult parent-teacher conference I'd navigated successfully, Dad suggested how he would have handled it. More directly, of course. The difference now was that I didn't absorb these comments like body blows. I let them slide past, sometimes with a non-committal or a gentle redirect. Occasionally, when they crossed a line, I pushed back. Actually, Dad, I've handled dozens of these conferences. I know what works with my parents. These small assertions of confidence seemed to surprise them, but they were learning to adjust. Slowly. In July, on the hottest day of the year, I was sorting through teaching supplies in my sweltering apartment when my phone rang. Dad's number. "Emily, your mother's hurt her back, gardening in this heat. I told her not to, but you know how she gets. She's asking for you." The old Emily would have dropped everything and rushed over. The new Emily took a breath before answering. "Is she okay? Should she go to the hospital?" No. Doctor said it's just a strain. She needs to rest. Ice. Take it easy. But she's been asking for you all morning." I glanced at the clock. It was my one free day to prepare for the upcoming school year, and I'd planned every hour. "I can come. By after lunch," I offered. "Around 2?" There was a pause, and I could almost hear him recalibrating his expectations. "That'll be fine. I'll tell her." When I arrived at their house, my childhood home, I braced myself for the familiar feeling of regression that usually washed over me when I crossed that threshold. But it didn't come. I was still Emily the teacher, Emily the finalist, Emily who had found her voice. Mom was in her bedroom, propped up on pillows, looking uncomfortable but not in severe pain. "Oh, you came," she said, as if surprised, though she'd been the one to ask for me. Of course I came. I set down the bag I'd brought. I picked up some arnica gel from that natural pharmacy near me. It might help with the inflammation. She held out her hand for the tube, examining it skeptically. "Does it actually work?" Aisha swears by it, and she throws out her back at least once a year from bending over patient beds. I perched on the edge of the mattress. What happened exactly? As she described reaching for a stubborn weed and feeling the telltale twinge, I looked around the room. It hadn't changed much since my childhood. Same floral curtains, same mahogany furniture, same framed family photos on the dresser. I stood to examine them. Jack's graduation, Jack's wedding, Jack's kids. And there, almost hidden behind the others, a small frame with a newspaper clipping about the Teacher of the Year ceremony. My name was highlighted in yellow. Something warm unfurled in my chest. She'd kept the article. Not just kept it, but displayed it. "Dad's idea," Mom said, noticing my attention. "He was quite impressed with your speech." I turned, surprised. "He was?" We both were. She adjusted her position, wincing slightly. "You sounded so confident up there. Not like..." She stopped herself. "Not like what?" She looked uncomfortable, and not just from her back pain. Not like the little girl who was always afraid to speak up in school, who let those mean girls tease her about her stutter in fourth grade, who would rather hide in the library than raise her hand in class. I stared at her, momentarily speechless. All those years, I'd thought they hadn't noticed my struggles, or worse, had been embarrassed by them. But she remembered. She'd been paying attention, in her way. "That's why I became a teacher," I said slowly. "To create a classroom where kids like me would feel safe speaking up." "Is it?" She seemed genuinely surprised. "I always thought you chose teaching because it was easier than what your father and I had hoped for you." The old hurt flared, but I pushed past it. "What had you hoped for?" She looked away. "Law, maybe. Or business, like Jack. Something that would challenge you." I laughed, the sound sharper. than I intended. "Mom, I wrangle 30 10-year-olds every day. I design curriculum that engages reluctant learners. I navigate school politics, budget constraints, and helicopter parents. It's the furthest thing from easy." For once, she didn't dismiss me. She nodded slowly. "I'm starting to see that." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of decades of misunderstanding between us. "Your father wanted to come to your classroom," she said suddenly. "After the ceremony, to see you teach. He didn't know how to ask." "He can come any time," I said, surprised again. "Both of you can." "Maybe in the fall. When your back is better," I added, gently redirecting to her immediate needs. "Now, do you want me to show you some stretches that might help? Aisha taught me a few that are good for lower back pain." She nodded, and I carefully guided her through a simple routine, my hands steadying her when necessary. It was the most physical contact we'd had in years. As we moved through the exercises, I realized how small she seemed now. When had she shrunk from the towering figure of my childhood to this fragile woman with thinning hair and papery skin? Later, as I was preparing to leave, Dad caught me in the hallway. "She's feeling better," he said, not quite a question. "The stretches should help if she does them regularly." He nodded, then cleared his throat. "Your mother said you'd be willing to have visitors. In your classroom." "I would. My kids would. Love to meet you." Good. He rocked slightly on his heels. "I taught college for 35 years, you know. Might have some pointers." I bit back my initial reaction, that teaching 5th grade was nothing like lecturing university students, and found a more generous response. "I'd value your perspective, and I might surprise you with a few teaching techniques you've never seen before." He almost smiled. "I look forward to it." That night, as I drove home to my apartment, I thought about the newspaper clipping displayed among the family photos. Such a small gesture, yet it spoke volumes. It wasn't the full-throated validation I'd once craved, but it was something. A beginning. A recognition. The distance I'd created had allowed us all to see each other more clearly. Not perfectly. We would never be a Hallmark card family, but with more honesty than before. The broken patterns were being replaced, slowly and imperfectly, with new ones that allowed more room for who I actually was, not who they'd wanted me to be. As I pulled into my parking spot, my phone dinged with a text from Mom. The arnica. Helped. Thank you. 2 simple sentences that contained no criticism, no comparison to Jack, no subtle dig, just gratitude. I smiled as I typed back. Glad to hear it. Rest up. Progress indeed. Small steps on a long road. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday in late September, bearing the official seal of Westfield Academy, one of Boston's most prestigious private schools. I'd almost tossed it with the junk mail until the weight of the file paper caught my attention. "Ms. Emily Pearson," it began. "Following your outstanding recognition as a Massachusetts Teacher of the Year finalist, we would like to invite you to interview for the position of 5th grade lead teacher and curriculum coordinator at Westfield Academy." I sank onto my couch, letter trembling slightly in my hands. Westfield Academy. The school with the state-of-the-art STEM lab. The school with class sizes capped at 15 students. The school where teachers were given sabbaticals for professional development. The school that paid nearly double my current salary. The rest of the letter outlined the position. More autonomy, more resources, more everything, and requested a response within the week. My first instinct was to call Aisha, but she was on a 12-hour shift at the hospital. My second was, surprisingly, to call my parents. The realization gave me pause. After months of carefully managed Sunday brunches and cautious conversations, had we actually progressed to the point where they'd be my confidants again? I set the letter aside and tried to focus on grading math assessments, but my mind kept drifting to that embossed letterhead. Westfield Academy wanted me. Me. Not because I had an Ivy League pedigree or the right connections, but because they'd seen my work, my passion, my results with students. By the time I crawled into bed, I'd mentally accepted the job a dozen times, and rejected it just as many. When my alarm went off the next morning, the decision was no clearer. My students sensed my distraction. Zach, my struggling reader who'd made so much progress, actually asked if I was feeling okay. Just tired, I assured him, pulling myself together. Let's get back to our story map. After school, I found Jack waiting in the hallway outside my classroom, looking comically out of place among the kid-sized chairs and colorful bulletin boards. Surprise inspection, he joked, straightening from where he'd been examining a display of student artwork. Hope I pass muster. What are you doing here? I asked, genuinely surprised. Jack's law office was downtown, nowhere near my school. Had a deposition cancel. Thought I'd stop by, see the famous classroom. He gestured around. It's not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. More desks in rows? Less. He waved vaguely at the reading nook with its beanbags and string lights. Coziness. I smiled despite myself. Education's changed a bit since we were kids. Clearly. He picked up one of the student journals from my desk. Can I? I nodded, and he flipped through, eyebrows raising at the detailed feedback I'd written. You do this for all of them? 28 students, 5 subjects, every week. I started gathering papers into my bag. It's part of the job. He whistled low. No wonder you're always tired at brunch. I shrugged, not wanting to dive into the realities of teaching. The hours, the emotional investment, the constant struggle for resources. Not with Jack, who'd never had to worry about making ends meet a day in his life. Want to grab coffee? He asked, setting the journal down carefully. There's something I wanted to talk to you about. 20 minutes later, we were settled at a corner table in a cafe near the school, steam rising from our mugs. Jack seemed uncharacteristically nervous, fidgeting with his napkin. So, he finally said, Mom mentioned something interesting. Last week, said Dad's planning to come watch you teach. He is, I confirmed. We're working on setting a date. That's unexpected. A lot of things have been unexpected lately. I took a sip of my latte. Including you showing up at my classroom. He had the grace to look sheepish. Yeah, well, I've been thinking about some things you said. At the ceremony and after. About not feeling seen. I tensed. Despite our improved relations, we'd never directly addressed the elephant in the room, his golden child status, my perpetual runner-up position in the family hierarchy. Jack, no, let me finish. He leaned forward. I've benefited from it my whole life, Em. The way they favor me, the way they push you aside. I've known it was happening and I've never said anything. That makes me complicit. His directness was startling. Jack had always been the diplomatic one, smoothing over tensions, avoiding confrontation. It's not your fault they're the way they are, I said carefully. Maybe not, but it is my fault that I've never stood up for you. He met my eyes squarely. I'm sorry. For all of it. The apology I'd never expected hit me like a physical force. To have him acknowledge it, after all these years of pretending, it was momentarily overwhelming. Thank you, I managed, fighting the sudden tightness in my throat. He nodded, seeming relieved to have it out in the open. So, that's one thing. The other thing is, he hesitated. I heard something through the grapevine about Westfield Academy headhunting you. I nearly choked on my coffee. How could you possibly know about that? I just got the letter yesterday. Boston's smaller than you think. Diane's cousin is on their board. Your name came up at dinner last week. He studied my face. Are you considering it? The letter was still sitting on my coffee table at home, unanswered. I don't know. It's a lot to think about. It's a great opportunity, he said cautiously. Prestigious school, better pay, resources. But, nothing. If you want it, you should go for it. I narrowed my eyes, sensing an undercurrent I couldn't quite identify. You have an opinion. Just say it. He sighed. Okay. Westfield kids are different. They're not Zach, with his dad texting you at midnight about how you changed his life. They're kids whose parents expect A's as a baseline and will call their lawyers if they get B's. The resources come with strings. His assessment was eerily accurate, speaking to my own reservations. How would you know? You don't even have kids in public school. He winced slightly. Low blow, Em. Sorry, I muttered. It's just, this decision is complicated enough without family opinions weighing in. That's fair. He took a sip of his coffee. For what it's worth, I think you're exactly where you're supposed to be, but I also think you'd excel anywhere, including Westfield. The vote of confidence, delivered so casually, meant more than he knew. Thanks, Jack. I hesitated, then plunged ahead. Would you mind not mentioning this to Mom and Dad yet? I'm still processing. Of course, he mimicked locking his lips. Attorney-sister confidentiality. As we parted ways outside the cafe, Jack surprised me with a quick hug. Whatever you decide, I've got your back this time. I mean it. The weight of his words stayed with me as I drove home. For as long as I could remember, I'd defined myself in opposition to Jack. He was the successful one. I was the disappointment. He was the favorite. I was the afterthought. This new alliance, this bridge between us, disrupted a narrative I'd held onto for decades. That night, I pulled out the Westfield letter again, reading it more carefully. The position was impressive on paper. Everything a career educator could want. But Jack's warning about the culture nagged at me. I thought of my current students, diverse in every way, challenging and rewarding in equal measure. I thought of Zach's father's text, of the thank you notes taped above my desk, of the progress my struggling readers had made. Impulsively, I reached for my phone and dialed Mom's number. Emily, is everything all right? Her voice was concerned. We rarely called each other outside of arranging our Sunday brunches. Everything's fine, I assured her. I need some advice. There was a startled pause. From me? Yes. I took a deep breath. I've been offered a job. At a prestigious private school. More money, more resources. But I'd be leaving my current students, my school community. Oh. The surprise in her voice was palpable. Well, that's wonderful, isn't it? A step up. Classic Mom. Immediately, seeing it as a ladder to climb. Maybe. But there's more to consider than just status or money. Of course, she said quickly. I just meant, well, your father and I always knew you were capable of more. The familiar sting of her words made me regret the call. More than what, Mom? More than making a difference in 28 young lives every year? More than creating a classroom where every child feels valued? That's not what I meant, she protested, but I could hear the defensiveness creeping in. Then what did you mean? There was a long pause, and when she spoke again, her voice had softened. I meant that you've always sold yourself short, Emily. You could have done anything, become anyone, and you chose teaching. Because it's what I love, I said firmly. It's what I'm good at. Another pause. Yes, I can see that now. She cleared her throat. What would this new position entail exactly? I outlined the Westfield offer, trying to keep my tone neutral. When I finished, she was quiet for so long, I thought we'd lost the connection. Mom? I'm here. She sounded thoughtful. You know, when your father was about your age, he was offered a position at Harvard. More prestigious than Boston College, better pay, more recognition. This was news to me. He turned it down? He did. Said he'd built something at BC that mattered to him, that his students needed consistency, not just a big name on their transcripts. There was a rustling sound, like she was settling into a chair. I was furious with him. Couldn't understand why he'd pass up such an opportunity. But now I think I understand a little better. Her voice had gone soft, reflective. When you love the work itself, not just what others think of it. That's rare, Emily. Rarer than you might realize. I sat in stunned silence. It was possibly the most insightful thing my mother had ever said to me, and certainly the most supportive of my career choices. So you think I should stay where I finally asked. I think, she said carefully, that you should do what brings you joy, not what looks impressive at family gatherings. Coming from her, the queen of appearances, this was revolutionary advice. Thank you, I said, meaning it deeply. You're welcome. She paused. Your father and I didn't always get it right with you, did we? The understatement was so enormous I almost laughed. Not always, no. We're trying to do better. It was as close to an apology as she'd ever come. Now tell me more about this school that's trying to steal you away. Are they at least offering a signing bonus? As I filled her in on the details, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. For the first time in memory, my mother was treating me like an adult whose decisions she respected, rather than a perpetual disappointment to be managed. And for the first time, I was speaking to her not from a place of defiance or defensiveness, but as one professional to another. The Westfield offer had succeeded in one unexpected way. It had shown me just how far we'd all come. I turned down Westfield Academy. The decision crystallized one Tuesday morning as I watched Zach, my struggling reader, proudly read aloud a paragraph he'd written about Hawks. His classmates applauded spontaneously when he finished, and the look on his face, pure, unfiltered pride, was worth more than any salary Westfield could offer. I sent my polite rejection letter that afternoon, citing my commitment to my current students and school community. The Westfield headmaster called personally to try to change my mind, mentioning figures that made my head spin, but I remained firm. Some things weren't negotiable. When I mentioned my decision at Sunday brunch, I braced for disappointment or lectures about missed opportunities. Instead, Dad nodded thoughtfully. Loyalty matters, he said, always respected that about good teachers. Coming from him, this was high praise indeed. Mom was less restrained. Well, I hope they at least offered you a raise to stay. You should be compensated properly for turning down such an opportunity. Some things never changed completely, and Mom's focus on practical matters was one of them. But there was concern beneath her practicality now, a genuine interest in my financial security that felt protective rather than judgmental. Actually, I said, I did negotiate something with Principal Washington. I'm taking on some curriculum development work that comes with a stipend. Good girl, Mom said approvingly. Always get it in writing. October brought crisp air, changing leaves, and Dad's long-promised visit to my classroom. We'd settled on a Thursday when my students would be presenting projects on the water cycle, something I thought might interest him given his background in earth sciences. That morning, I was more nervous than I'd been for my Teacher of the Year presentation. I'd warned my students that we'd have a visitor. My dad, who used to be a professor, and they were buzzing with excitement, eager to impress. Dad arrived 10 minutes early, dressed in slacks and a blazer as if attending a faculty meeting. He looked out of place among the colorful chaos of my classroom, but determined to adapt. "Professor Pearson," I greeted him with exaggerated formality, making my students giggle. "Welcome to room 22. He shook my hand solemnly, playing along. "Thank you for having me, Ms. Pearson." I'd arranged a comfortable chair for him in the corner, but to my surprise, he wandered the room instead, examining student work on the walls, pausing to study their science notebooks laid out on display. "You've made quite a home here," he remarked quietly. Before I could respond, the bell rang and my students tumbled in, vibrating with energy. 28 pairs of eyes darted between me and the tall stranger in their classroom, curiosity radiating from them like heat. "Good morning, scientists," I called, using our standard greeting. "Good morning, Ms. Pearson," they chorused back. As I mentioned yesterday, we have a special guest today. This is my father, Professor Pearson. He taught college science for many years, and he's here to see your amazing water cycle projects. Dad raised a hand in greeting, looking more nervous than I'd ever seen him. These kids, so much smaller, louder, and more unpredictable than his undergraduate students, clearly took him out of his comfort zone. Before we begin our presentations, does anyone have questions for Professor Pearson? Every hand shot up. I called on Michaela, knowing she'd set a good tone. "Did Ms. Pearson get her love of science from you?" she asked earnestly. Dad's eyes met mine, genuine surprise in them. I suppose she did, though I never realized she loved science until now. More hands waved. I nodded to Jaden. "Did Ms. Pearson get in trouble a lot when she was little?" The class erupted in giggles, and to my amazement, Dad smiled. Not as much as her brother. But she did once set up an unauthorized experiment testing whether earthworms could survive in the bathtub. They could not. The kids howled with laughter, and I felt my cheeks flush. I had no memory of this incident, but it sounded like something my curious younger self would have done. "One more question," I said. "Then we need to start our presentations." I called on Zach, who had been waving his hand frantically. "Are you proud of Ms. Pearson being such a good teacher?" The classroom went silent. I felt a wave of mortification. Leave it to a fifth grader to ask the most emotionally charged question possible. But before I could deflect, Dad cleared his throat. "Yes," he said simply. "Very proud." The sincerity in his voice made something catch in my chest. I turned quickly to the classroom schedule on the board. "Okay, scientists, let's get to those presentations. Group 1, you're up first." For the next hour, my students explained the water cycle through posters, demonstrations, and even a rap written by my most rhythmically gifted students. They were brilliant, engaged, articulate, collaborative. Everything I'd taught them to be. Throughout it all, Dad watched with increasing interest. He asked thoughtful questions, laughed at their jokes, and looked genuinely impressed by their grasp of scientific concepts. I saw him through their eyes, not as my critical father, but as a distinguished visitor showing them respect, and it changed something in how I saw him too. When the presentations ended and the students moved on to independent work, Dad came to stand beside my desk. "They're remarkable," he said quietly, "and so are you. With them. Thank you." I busied myself sorting papers, oddly shy in the face of his approval. "I never understood before," he continued. "What you do here. I thought teaching young children was easier than college," I supplied when he hesitated. "Simpler," he corrected. "Less intellectually demanding. I was wrong." The admission, so honest, so unlike him, left me momentarily speechless. "I've been wrong about a lot of things, Emily." Before I could respond, Zach appeared at my elbow, worksheet in hand. "Ms. Pearson, I'm stuck on number 4. "I'll be right with you, Zach." I turned back to Dad. "We can talk more after school?" He nodded. "I'll wait." The rest of the day passed in a blur of normal classroom activity, math lessons, reading groups, a minor crisis involving spilled paint during art. Through it all, Dad observed, occasionally jotting notes in a small notebook he'd brought. By the final bell, I'd almost forgotten the strangeness of having him there. So naturally had he blended into the background of our day. As the last student left with a cheerful, "Bye, Ms. Pearson." "Bye, Professor Pearson," we found ourselves alone in the suddenly quiet classroom. "You want some coffee?" I offered. "The teacher's lounge has a decent machine." "I'd like that." We walked together through the halls of my school, nodding to colleagues and lingering students. The afternoon light slanted through windows, turning ordinary bulletin boards and lockers into something almost beautiful. In the empty lounge, I fixed us both coffee, remembering without thinking that he took his black with 1 sugar. "You know," he said as I handed him the mug, "I always wondered why you chose elementary education. Now I see it." "What do you see?" "That you're not just teaching them subjects. You're teaching them how to be in the world." He took a sip of coffee. "I never managed that with my students. Content, yes. Character, no." "Your students were adults," I pointed out. "Mine are still becoming themselves. Aren't we all?" He gazed out the window at the playground. "I'm trying to, at least. To become better." The vulnerability in his voice was so unexpected, so human, that I felt a sudden urge to protect him. "You're doing okay," I said softly. He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Your mother and I, we had certain ideas about success, about what it looked like. We pushed those ideas onto you and Jack, without ever asking what success meant to you. You wanted what you thought was best for us. We wanted what was familiar," he corrected. "What we understood, and we missed, seeing who you really were in the process." He set down his coffee cup carefully. "I'm sorry for that, Emily." The apology I'd waited decades to hear landed gently between us, like a leaf falling from a tree. Natural, inevitable, right on time. "Thank you," I said simply. We sat in companionable silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history, both present and somehow lighter than before. "You know," he said eventually, "I still have all your school projects, from when you were their age." He nodded toward the hallway where my students had disappeared. "In the attic. Your mother wanted to clear them out years ago, but I wouldn't let her." "You kept my school projects?" This was news to me. "Even the bad ones?" "Especially those." His smile was wry. "The solar system mobile that leaned entirely to one side. The diorama where the clay figures kept falling over. Your mother just saw the imperfections. I saw the effort." I stared at him. This man I'd spent my life trying to please, who'd apparently been paying closer attention than I'd ever realized. "I'd like to see them sometime," I said. "The projects." "I'd like that too." He checked his watch. "Your mother's expecting me back for dinner. Will you join us?" The invitation hung in the air between us, not a Sunday brunch in neutral territory, but a return to their home, their table. A year ago, I would have seen it as a step backward. Now, it felt like something else entirely. A choice, freely made, between equals. Yes, I decided. I'd like that. As we drove our separate cars from my school to my childhood home, I thought about cycles, how water evaporates, forms clouds, falls as rain, and returns to the sea. How patterns repeat, but never exactly the same way twice. how distance and proximity each serve their purpose in the natural order of things. The family I returned to that evening wasn't magically healed or permanently transformed. Mom still made a comment about my practical haircut. Dad still interrupted. Occasionally when I was speaking, old dynamics surfaced and retreated like familiar tides. But there was space now. Space I'd created by stepping back. Space they'd honored by not rushing to fill it with their expectations. In that space, something new was growing. Not perfect, not complete, but alive and real. A relationship based, not on who they'd wanted me to be, but on who I actually was. Not on comparisons to Jack or anyone else, but on my own intrinsic value. As we sat around their dining table, the very one where I'd felt so diminished all those Sunday dinners, I realized that the broken plate had indeed been a beginning, not an ending. The shattered porcelain had cleared space for something new to emerge. "Tell us more about your curriculum development project," Dad said, passing the breadbasket my way. "It sounds fascinating." "Yes," Mom chimed in. "And will you get published?" "Recognition is important in academia." I smiled, recognizing the old pattern but finding it more amusing than hurtful now. "It's not about recognition, Mom. It's about creating something useful for teachers like me." "Well, of course," she backpedaled slightly, "but credit where credit is due. Some things would never change completely, and that was okay. Actually," I said, taking a roll, "I do have some news to share." They both looked at me expectantly, and I felt a flicker of the old anxiety, the fear of disappointing them, but it passed quickly, replaced by a calm certainty. "I've decided to start a mentoring program for new teachers in our district. Principal Washington is fully on board, and we've secured a small grant to fund it." "That sounds like a significant undertaking," Dad said thoughtfully. "Leadership suits you." "Thanks, Dad." The words came easily now, no longer choked by resentment or doubt. "Will it mean more hours?" Mom asked, predictably practical. "You're already working too much." "It will," I acknowledged, "but it's worth it. I had to figure out so much on my own when I started teaching. If I can make that road easier for others." She nodded slowly. "That's a worthy goal." Coming from her, it was high praise indeed. As the evening wound down, as I prepared to drive back to my apartment, I found myself lingering in the hallway, looking at family photos I'd avoided examining on previous visits. There I was at various ages, gap-toothed in elementary school, awkward in middle school, serious in my college graduation gown, interspersed with Jack's milestones, yes, but present nonetheless. Part of the family narrative, even when I'd felt invisible. "You know," Mom said, coming to stand beside me, "we never could get you to smile for photos, always so serious." I braced for criticism, but it didn't come. "Just like your father," she added softly. "Both of you, thinking so deeply about everything." It wasn't exactly a compliment, but it wasn't a criticism either. Just an observation. A connection drawn between father and daughter. A recognition of inheritance beyond broken plates and unmet expectations. "I'll see you Sunday?" she asked as I opened the front door. "We could try that new place with the French toast you mentioned." "Actually," I said, "why don't you come to my place? I make a pretty mean French toast myself." The invitation surprised us both. I'd never hosted them in my apartment, had kept that space as my sanctuary away from their influence. "We'd like that," she said after a moment. "Very much." As I drove home through familiar streets, I found myself thinking of my fifth graders and the water cycle they'd so proudly explained. Evaporation, condensation, precipitation, collection. Around and around it goes, the same elements rearranged, repurposed, renewed. Families were like that too, I decided. The same essential elements: love, hurt, hope, history, cycling through different forms. What had broken could condense into something new. What had evaporated could return in a different shape. The broken plate had been just the beginning of my story, not the end. And as I pulled into my apartment complex, I found myself looking forward to Sunday, to sharing my space, my skills, my life with the people who had given me the first. Not from obligation or habit, but from choice, from strength, from the knowledge that I was enough, exactly as I was. Full circle, but never the same way twice.